This is the Huey Cobra, the world's first helicopter specifically designed for the armed helicopter role. It provides the ground soldier the finest direct fire support any Army has ever known. There is no question about it. The Huey Cobra is a different breed. Almost everyone who sees the ship for the first time is struck by its slim, clean aerodynamic lines. The first flight quickly confirms the impression of its deadly effectiveness. But in order to fully understand the factors that dictated this design, we must review the evolution of the whole Huey family. For the roots of the AH-1G lie back in 1955. It was that year that the first Huey helicopter flew. This was a utility helicopter designed for the frontline evacuation of casualties. It was wide enough to accommodate litters across the ship for ease of loading. It soon became apparent that the basic Huey design would serve far more missions than just medical evacuation. The family of Hueys we know today was quick to evolve. The XH-40, the UH-1A, B, and D. The UH-1D, with its squad carrying capability, has become the standard troop transport helicopter in Army air mobile operations in Vietnam. And to offer armed support to these troop-carrying helicopters, the UH-1B, and later designation of the C with the 540 rotor system, was adapted to the armed helicopter role. Although this new breed of weapon helicopters has proven itself indispensable, there has been a basic compromise in aircraft performance. The addition of various weapon kits substantially increase both drag and weight. This has created the paradox of escort aircraft, which have less speed and maneuverability than the troop and cargo carrying vehicles they are to support. The Army realized that the quickest way to achieve a meaningful improvement was to modify the Huey into an integrated weapons configuration. These then were the design parameters of the Huey Cobra: maximum utilization of operational Huey components, packaged in a shape that would provide the performance and mission effectiveness that combat required. So the Cobra took shape around combat-proven Huey components. The 540 rotor system with its simplified door hinge design. The Army's 1,400 shaft horsepower T-53L13 turbine engine. And a transmission and tail rotor system which is common to both C and D model Huey helicopters. Tandem seating gives the Cobra the advantages of improved performance due to a slim fuselage and increased combat effectiveness for the pilot, co-pilot gunner team by means of virtually unlimited visibility. In 1963, Bell verified the tactical advantages of tandem seating in their experimental Sioux Scout helicopter. The chin turret and the lift obtained from the wings were also evaluated during the flight test program of this concept aircraft. This prototype embodied the aerodynamic design which the Cobra reflects today. The Huey Cobra speed and maneuverability comes primarily from the greatly decreased aerodynamic drag. The fully armed Huey gunship, with a fuselage 108 inches wide, has a flat plate drag area of up to 35 square feet. The Huey Cobra, with equivalent armament, has less than 1/3 the drag of its predecessor. This reduction of drag, coupled with the increased horsepower, provides the Huey Cobra with increased airspeed and rate of climb. This will permit the Cobra to arrive in the target area sooner remain there longer, and carry a greater ordnance load. For the first time, the troop-carrying helicopters of the Army will have an armed escort which can move easily in and around the formation, combining maneuverability with high forward speed for protection of the escorted ships. Closely linked to the Cobra's high-speed performance are the flight characteristics of stability and maneuverability. To utilize its high performance to best tactical advantage, new flight techniques have been developed around the Cobra's unprecedented maneuverability. These return-to-target maneuvers are the helicopter equivalent of fixed-wing acrobatics. When one talks performance, it is only natural to consider the rotor system. The Huey Cobra uses the standard 540 rotor, but the stabilizer bar is gone, replaced by a simple 3-axis electronic stability augmentation system. The SAS system is perhaps the key to stability during ordnance firing. These rate-sensing gyros are able to detect changes in aircraft attitude caused by wind gusts, rocket firing, or other external inputs. The SAS system is able to sense attitude changes and make control corrections before the movement is apparent to the pilot. This not only gives inherently better accuracy, but also allows both pilot and gunner to concentrate on the mission during critical firing passes. Armament is, of course, Huey Cobra's reason for existence. The aircraft has been designed with armament a functional part of the entire airframe. The TAT-102A chin turret houses a single 7.62 millimeter minigun. Other versions have dual weapon turrets with 2 40mm grenade launchers, 2 miniguns, or one of each. The turret is attached to basic aircraft structure, just below the co-pilot gunner. Highly directed, flexible fire is possible from the turret through 230 degrees in azimuth, 50 degrees of depression, and 15 to 25 degrees in elevation. Placement of the gunner in front of the pilot offers him unequaled visibility. The gunner normally operates the turret. The pilot normally fires the wing stores. However, the gunner can control wing stores, and the pilot can fire the gun turret when it is in the stowed position firing forward. The forward station also incorporates sidearm flight controls, permitting the co-pilot gunner complete control of the aircraft should the pilot become a casualty. A fully articulated pantograph gun sight with built-in lead compensation is attached to the floor directly above the turret. This relationship of turret and sight minimizes gunnery errors due to parallax or deflection of intervening structure. The gunner has a choice of 1,300 or 4,000 rounds per minute firing rate. For the TAT-102A, the Cobra carries 8,000 rounds of 7.62 ammunition. Palletized ammunition is located in a bay directly behind the chin turret. Access to the ammo bay is provided on both sides of the ship. This affords extremely quick turnaround time, even with a mixed ordnance load. Huey Cobra wing stores are mounted on 4 hardpoints. These currently include the XM-18 minigun, the XM-157 2.75-inch folding fin aerial rocket pod with 7 rockets, or the XM-159, which contains 19 rockets. These wing stores can be mixed or used in pairs on the hardpoints, providing a maximum load of 76 rockets. A 20mm installation is under consideration. Crew and aircraft protection has been designed as an integral part of the Cobra, not an afterthought. Pilot and gunner seats are protected by lightweight boron carbide armor panels. The pilot seat is built of steel armor. Critical engine components, the fuel control system, and the compressor section have also been protected by armor. The hydraulic boost system has been protected through redundant design. Self-sealing fuel tanks have the ability to seal 50 caliber penetrations in the bottom 1/3 of the tank. The middle third can resist 30 caliber penetrations. The top 1/3 is tear resistant. One of the strongest lessons to come out of Vietnam is the need for improved aircraft survivability. Let's consider infrared and the growing arsenal of lethal heat-seeking weapons. For the past decade, the aviation community has emphasized performance, only to realize that the ability to survive in a hostile environment must also be an important design consideration. The Cobra has been designed to meet the weapon threats of this decade. The AH-1G has been designed with a tailpipe recessed within the engine cowling. Air entering the sail provides engine compartment cooling and exhausts through and cools an IR heat shield, reducing the aircraft infrared signature. This IR suppression technique substantially decreases the probabilities of infrared-seeking missiles acquiring the Cobra as a target. The Huey Cobra retains the maintenance ease of the Huey family. No lubrication is required in the Teflon-bearing 540 door hinge rotor. Large hinged cowlings provide better than ever access to engine and dynamic systems. Avionics equipment is located in the aft fuselage. All antennas are buried or flush-mounted to minimize drag. Most maintenance functions are similar to earlier model Hueys, and the Huey Cobra enjoys the same initial high time between overhaul as other Hueys. These design considerations were not arbitrary, but are the result of extensive constant feedback by Bell representatives in the battle areas of Vietnam. Prior to final design of the Cobra, top management of Bell went to Vietnam to learn from the men who fly Hueys what was needed in an armed assault helicopter. The needs defined by these men show up in the smallest detail of design. Take the emergency ordnance jettison system. The outboard loads are piston-driven downward with a force of 1,500 pounds. The inboard stores angled away from the ship with twice the force. It is a small item of hardware, yet it could make the critical difference in survivability in many marginal combat situations. And like all forms of insurance, high survivability design considerations buy a sense of security even should they never be used. It would be difficult to conceive of a more extensive test and evaluation program for any aircraft. The wide variety of ordnance has been extensively fired in situations which approximate ultimate combat deployment. The Cobra test program was flown by Army pilots with extensive Vietnam combat experience. The evolution of tactics for this unique helicopter represents the integration of the skills of these men with the expanded capability of this newest member of the Huey family. Currently, production Huey Cobras are rolling off the assembly line to join the battle in Vietnam. In the brief space of less than 2 years from the start of design effort, the aircraft entered combat. Today, the Huey Cobra, backed by a heritage of more than 3 million air hours chalked up by other members of the Huey family, is in the skies to ease the burden of the Army man on the ground.
AH-1 Huey Cobra is an aggressive, high-speed tactical combat helicopter, an important addition to the Army inventory of rotary wing aerial weapons systems. This light and highly maneuverable helicopter was designed and built around the flying mission. For pilots accustomed to duty in slower and less maneuverable helicopters, the Huey Cobra presents a different flight envelope. Its capabilities make certain maneuvers easier to make. These maneuvers require different pilot reactions, which must be mastered in order to ensure maximum mission effectiveness and safety. In-flight emergency procedures, in particular those executed to counteract emergencies during critical flight conditions, must become second nature to the pilot. He must also be able to apply corrections in different sequence, magnitude, or direction for safe recovery from emergencies. Normal auto-rotational procedures are followed whenever the Huey Cobra flies at less than 120 knots indicated airspeed, within the maximum glide speed of 95 knots, down to the minimum rates of descent of 65 to 75 knots. Safe auto-rotational descent with power off is similar on the Huey Cobra to that in other helicopters. Handling characteristics without power are similar to those of a normal power descent by auto-rotation. The Huey Cobra's increased capabilities give the pilot a greater margin of safety when dealing with in-flight emergencies. High-speed dives are useful for many Huey Cobra tactical support missions. Typically, the helicopter is placed in an attitude of 15 to 20 degrees forward pitch. Speeds can range from 120 to 190 knots indicated airspeed. A high-speed dive at over 120 knots is a critical flight condition for engine failure, and the emergency procedure is different from that at lower speeds. An engine failure in high-speed flight causes the nose to immediately pitch up. If a collective reduction is made prior to initiating a cyclic movement, the Stability Control Augmentation System, or SCAS, would drastically lower the tip path plane, probably leading to mast bumping. To take control from the SCAS before this situation occurs, first make an aft cyclic movement. Next, reduce collective pitch as necessary to maintain RPM in the green. Coordination of aft cyclic flare and gradual collective reduction keeps the rotor loaded until airspeed drops as required. Depending on the glide distance desired, normal auto-rotation landing can now be made. Often, the tactical flight mission will require recon or other high-speed flight at treetop level. Again, the higher speeds of which the Huey Cobra is capable give the pilot an added margin of safety. Here is the emergency procedure for an engine failure during high-speed flight at low altitude. As in the high-speed dive, when power is lost, the pilot's first step is an aft cyclic movement to take control from the SCAS and to convert the helicopter's high speed into altitude. The flare should be more pronounced than in level flight. collective pitch can then be reduced to keep rotor RPM in the green. The pilot continues to monitor airspeed and rotor RPM to the point where recovery is possible. A further decrease in rotor RPM may be expected as the helicopter levels off. But the pilot has gained altitude and time to look for a landing area, and he can still accelerate if necessary. Thus, the improved capability of the Huey Cobra has improved his chances of locating and reaching a safe landing area. Now, speed can be reduced appropriately to reach the intended landing area by normal auto-rotative glide and flare-type auto-rotative landing. The same flare and climb maneuver can improve the pilot's chances of analyzing his power loss at a safer altitude. It might be due to failure of the fuel governor on the low side. If so, he might find N1 engine RPM stable and also stable exhaust gas temperature, indicating the engine is still operating. If this is so, there is a possibility of regaining power by switching to emergency governor position. First, roll off throttle to flight idle while reducing collective pitch to maintain rotor RPM. Then, change the governor from the automatic to the emergency position and adjust the throttle to maintain an engine RPM at 64 to 6,600. Throttle adjustments must be made slowly and evenly to prevent overheating or overspeeding and the possibility of flame out or compressor stall. Once engine power has been restored and the engine has reached the operating RPM required, the pilot can continue flight, leaving the governor switch in the emergency position. Here is the emergency procedure for a fuel control failure on the high side, resulting in overspeeding. There is a gain in engine N2 RPM approaching the red line. When this happens, load the rotor and maintain engine rotor RPM below the red line. Increase collective pitch to correct the overspeed condition, simultaneously rolling off throttle until normal operating RPM is maintained manually. The helicopter will climb until the necessary throttle adjustment is made, and RPM is established at 64 to 6,600. Flight should be maintained with the governor switch in the automatic position. Throttle is adjusted as required. At any time, for a number of reasons, anti-torque malfunctions can occur in flight. The key to successful recovery is the pilot's ability to analyze the type of anti-torque malfunction correctly and to take the corrective action suitable to the particular problem. In this case, the pilot neglected to detect and analyze his problem or to anticipate the result of landing in this out-of-trim condition. His hasty reaction and wrong correction causes a sudden spin. There are several types of anti-torque failure and symptoms, and each case may have several different combinations of them. The experienced helicopter pilot knows there are two major groupings. First, complete loss of thrust. A failure of this type will result in the nose of the aircraft swinging to the right. The likely emergency procedure is powered flight to a suitable area and auto rotation at 45 to 50 knots minimum airspeed. If loss of thrust is due to the loss of the tail rotor, immediate auto rotation may be the solution. Other anti-torque malfunctions include situations in which the tail rotor is still producing thrust, but control is lost. In this example, the helicopter is in a climb, and the pilot does not have an indication of a malfunction. He follows the normal level-off procedure. However, normal reduction of power and normal application of right pedal fails to trim the aircraft, placing it out of trim, in this case, to the left. These symptoms usually indicate loss of tail rotor control, resulting in a fixed pitch left condition. The pilot should first gain altitude. He can add power to obtain it, climbing at least to 1,500 feet in order to be able to analyze his problem in safety with a margin for increased airspeed and power, if necessary, to correct the out-of-trim condition. Once the pilot has arrived at the safe altitude, he can level off at normal cruising condition, approximately 100 knots indicated airspeed. Next, he must determine the amount of anti-torque pitch that is now fixed into the system by the malfunction. If the pedal is stuck, this is a direct indication of the amount of anti-torque correction necessary. But the determination of anti-torque correction must be made by trial and error. If the linkage is broken and the pedals do not produce a correction, the pilot tries different combinations of air speed and power to correct trim. In other words, at the safe altitude, he can prepare himself for the conditions he will have to face when he makes his landing. To do this, he should simulate whatever type of landing he determines is best for the situation. In this case, once he has determined the trim correction, he should plan to make a practice running landing at 45 to 50 knots minimum airspeed with a 200 foot per minute rate of descent. Even if the practice landing is not perfect the first time, there is ample room and time for further analysis and practice before the actual landing. If the pilot cannot remove the out-of-trim condition entirely, he may have to accept a small amount of side slip with a slightly higher rate of descent. He will, in this case, plan to increase collective power before touchdown. Again, the practice landing can be made at the higher altitude, so he knows just how much power he will need to apply when he touches down. Now he can go ahead and make his landing, having performed an adequate preparatory analysis. The degree of side slip is controlled by coordinating the throttle and collective. In this way, the pilot has prevented a sudden and irreversibly unsafe torque condition arising from an incorrect or hasty analysis of the anti-torque malfunction. There are several in-flight emergencies that may require wing stores jettison. Emergency wing stores jettison procedures are executed at speeds less than 120 knots. The pilot has a wing stores jettison select switch. With this switch in the both position, all wing stores can be salvo jettisoned by activating the wing stores jettison switch, regardless of the battery switch position. To jettison the inboard wing stores, the pilot places the jettison select switch in the inboard position and lifts the wing stores jettison switch. The inboard pods are jettisoned at an angle of 34 degrees to allow for adequate skid clearance. With the pilot's jettison select switch in the outboard position, electrical power must be on and the jettison switch actuated. The gunner also has a jettison switch located on the left side of his instrument panel. This switch salvo jettisons all wing stores, regardless of the pilot's jettison select or battery switch position. When the wing stores are salvoed, the jettison sequence is outboard pods first at 1500 psi, then inboard at 3000 psi. Emergency wing stores jettison may be followed by emergency exits of pilot and gunner involving emergency jettison of the canopies. To jettison his canopy, the pilot slows the aircraft to 20 knots. He first rotates the door handle up, then rotates the jettison handle inboard to disconnect all holding points before pushing the canopy out. To jettison the gunner's canopy, the gunner also rotates the door handle up to unlock his door. Next, he rotates the jettison handle inboard. As this demonstration shows, the canopy has also been designed so that if, for any reason, it cannot be jettisoned, it can be broken out using the canopy breakout knife stowed in the aircraft. Emergency exit is possible, even though the normal exit and emergency canopy jettison procedures are not possible. These, then, are some of the major emergency procedures affected by the different capabilities of the AH-1 Huey Cobra. The experienced pilot will remember, at speeds above 120 knots, engine failure must be compensated for by aft cyclic movement first, to take control away from the SCAS before collective reduction is made. Once under 120 knots, a normal auto rotation and landing can be made. When in high-speed flight at treetop level, engine failures can be countered by converting speed to altitude by a steep flare and climb. If loss of power is caused by a governor failure on the low side, indicated by stabilized N.O.E. and EGT, the pilot must first reduce throttle to flight idle while lowering the collective, then switch to the emergency governor position. Once in emergency, the pilot must reapply throttle slowly and evenly to prevent engine overheating and overspeeding. If there is a high side governor failure, collective pitch must be increased sufficiently, along with the simultaneous decrease in throttle, to stabilize N2 RPM. The governor switch is left in the automatic position as flight is continued. It is essential that the pilot make a correct analysis of the magnitude and type of anti-torque malfunction, remembering that the turn and slip indicator will help determine what type of failure has occurred and what effect the pilot's power adjustments have on correcting the out-of-trim condition. The pilot can use the Huey Cobra's capability to give him time and speed to detect, analyze, and prepare for the correct type of landing. This film has illustrated some of the emergency procedures. To improve his chances for safe recovery and landing, the professional pilot studies and knows all emergency procedures.
with a little practice. The navigator has two jobs. The first one is obvious, navigating. But the second one is just as important, monitoring the engine, transmission, and other instruments. This job belongs to the navigator, so the pilot can stick to the flying. The prime hazards during N.O.E. flight are wires, telephone lines, power lines, what have you. The big problem, of course, is that they're not always easy to see. It helps to know that they're often, though not always, located close to roads and buildings, or along strips cut through trees, or strung along tree lines near farms. Dead tree snags are another difficult type of hazard. It's even worse if you're flying into the sun. Birds are also a potential problem, although helicopter bird strikes are rare. These feathered flyers are unpredictable, but will most often dive to avoid you. You should climb slightly to allow clearance if this will not reveal you to the enemy.
When you come down to basics, a lot of what's involved in Nap of the Earth proficiency is simply a matter of judgment. How far are your skids below you? How far is your tail rotor behind you? How big is your rotor disc? And will it fit through that opening up ahead? That judgment comes with practice. But there's more than just practice. There are some techniques you need for N.O.E. that just aren't what you do in other kinds of flying. And there are some things that you don't usually pay special attention to that become very important when you're N.O.E. Now, here are some of the things you need to know about.
One factor of particular importance to N.O.E. is wind. You need to be alert at all times for a gust or thermal that might shove you toward the ground or an obstacle. Anticipate getting a wind shift whenever you cross the edge of a ridge or valley. You can't predict which way the wind will shift. Just expect that some shift will occur. At N.O.E. altitudes, you will often fly into and out of translational lift. Let's review this phenomenon and see how it affects you. First, let's assume a no-wind situation. At a stationary hover, the aircraft is in ground effect. As you increase to a slow forward speed, say in the range of about 1 to 15 knots, the rotor is partly escaping from its downwash. It's getting somewhat cleaner air and so providing more lift. Because of this, you can accelerate while maintaining altitude without having to increase power. As you continue accelerating, you reach some particular airspeed at which effective translational lift occurs. This generally happens somewhere between 16 and 24 knots, depending on the aircraft and conditions. The rotor is now clear of the disturbed air, providing a distinct, noticeable increase in lift. The aircraft tends to rise. To maintain the desired N.O.E. altitude, you must reduce power. You handle this pretty much automatically every time you accelerate from a stationary hover while maintaining altitude. As you start out, you tilt the rotor plane, lose some lift, and come on with power to keep from descending. Then as you gain translational lift, you reduce the power. But the point is, when you're flying N.O.E., you keep speeding up and slowing down across the point of effective translational lift. You keep gaining and losing that extra lift. So you have to be constantly ready to make power adjustments to keep from rising or settling. At this height, altitude control is essential. Of course, whenever you change the power setting, the aircraft tends to yaw, and you can't afford to yaw either in a spot like this. That means you've also got to be constantly ready with the pedals. But speed changes aren't the only thing that affects translational lift. Consider this situation. You're flying at slow speed over level ground. Then you start up a slope. On the level, you're flying in disturbed air. But going up the hill, the rotor is moving into clean air, leaving the downwash behind. Here you gain translational lift without an increase of speed. Another situation that doesn't follow the general rule is when you're flying with a strong tailwind. At a slow airspeed, the disturbed air is carried out ahead of you, and you have the benefit of translational lift. When you speed up, you fly into the disturbed air and lose the effective translational lift. Just the opposite of what normally happens. And you have to respond with the opposite application of controls. In N.O.E. flight, you often can't anticipate when you'll gain or lose effective translational lift. What you have to do instead is learn to be alert, ready every instant to correct any tendency of the aircraft to change height or yaw by application of the controls. One of the main rules for safety in N.O.E. flight is that you must always be conscious of where your blades are. You must be aware of rotor disc and tail rotor clearance at all times. This is particularly important when making a turn. To provide extra clearance, slide over to the side of the flight path opposite the direction you're going to turn. For a right turn, slide over to the left. This gives you an extra margin of clearance when your rotor disc lowers for the turn. For a left turn, you first move over to the right. Some pilots new to N.O.E. occasionally get themselves into a slight problem when beginning a steep descent. You come up to the ridge. You fly beyond the edge far enough to be sure your tail rotor is clear. Then, to keep hugging the ground, you lower the collective rapidly. But if you do it too rapidly, you may get an RPM warning. Some pilots have mistaken this for a low RPM warning and bottomed the collective. But the circumstances in which this occurs and the fact that the warning alarm does not sound tell you that this is an overspeed. Ease back up on the collective until you regain normal RPM. In the Huey, there's another important reason for not beginning a descent too rapidly: the danger of mast bumping. So keep your control movement smooth. During N.O.E. flight, there will be times when you will want to quick stop. The normal quick stop technique isn't suitable. At this height, if you pitch up rapidly, your tail rotor might hit. So instead, pivot the aircraft about the tail rotor by raising the cockpit of the aircraft with increased power. Watch again, this time in slow motion. As nearly as possible, the tail rotor should remain at the same height above the ground throughout the maneuver. First, you increase collective. Then you apply aft cyclic to slow the aircraft while adjusting collective. Here's the way it looks at normal speed: collective, aft cyclic, adjust collective. Of course, you need pedals throughout the maneuver to maintain heading. Another flight procedure that's unique to N.O.E. is the one called mask-unmask. It's a way of observing or firing on enemy positions with a minimum of exposure to return fire. One way to do the mask-unmask is to take up a position somewhat back from the tree line and ascend with a slight forward acceleration. This method reduces the possibility of getting into a settling with power situation. Another way involves maintaining forward motion throughout. You fly up at N.O.E. height toward the masking obstacle. Pull up quickly, observe, then do a steep descending turn to regain masking. Let's see how an enemy might observe this same maneuver. another look. Pull up, level, and a steep descending turn. Always use particular caution in the descent of any mask-unmask procedure. Here's another way it can be done. You take up a stationary hover, masked from the enemy position by a ridge line, trees, or some other obstacle. Then you ascend vertically, high enough to sight or fire on the position, remaining exposed for no longer than 10 seconds. And you descend. Be extremely careful not to drift. That could lead to a descent into an obstacle. Properly done, you should end up in very nearly the same spot you started from. Throughout your N.O.E. flight, the CNC aircraft helps protect your safety by warning of unexpected hazards, keeping you clear of other training aircraft, and alerting you to any itinerant aircraft in the area. They also act as your radio relay. Close to the ground, you often can't raise other N.O.E. aircraft, even when they're very close by, because of terrain interference. A CNC aircraft is always with you on training flight. Only in combat will you be flying N.O.E. without a cover ship. The burden of becoming proficient enough at N.O.E. to fly it safely in combat without a cover ship is a burden, not just in piloting, but in navigating as well. More than any other kind of flying, safe and efficient N.O.E. depends on highly developed skill in navigating. And it's a very special kind of navigation that's required. The most important and most difficult aspect is learning to visualize the terrain. Here's a little test of your ability to visualize. What does this portion of the route look like at N.O.E. altitude? First, here's what the terrain looks like from 300 feet. The same thing, this time from 100 feet. And now here's what it looks like hugging the ground at N.O.E. height. How good was your visualization? By the way, the helicopter is now flying slower than it was at a higher altitude a moment ago. Remember the rule. The lower you go, the slower you go. But visualizing isn't the only problem. Things can get confusing when what you see on the map isn't what you see on the ground. For example, you may be looking for a stream and instead find a dry gully. And in rainy season, it can work the other way. Another example, a place name on the map may set you looking for a village. In fact, it may be no more than a small cluster of houses. Here's another possible source of confusion. You could search the map all day for this pond and never find it. The pond is man-made and hasn't been charted yet. As a general rule, remember that man-made features can change. It's best to rely on terrain features for your navigating. One principle you should always bear in mind when pre-planning your route. Steer clear of features plotted on the map that an enemy could easily sight on. That means don't fly for any distance alongside roads, railroads, power lines, or larger streams. Another hazard, dusty roads, which could easily reveal your presence to the enemy or create a hazard if you're engulfed by the dust cloud. Also on training flights that go off-post, you have a responsibility to avoid unnecessary disturbance to the community. Stay well clear of livestock, chicken houses, and the like. And don't forget that you're still governed by the minimum clearance rule over inhabited areas on all training flights. In unfamiliar terrain, there will be times when there just doesn't seem to be any clues to which way you should be going. You have to pause in your flight while the navigator figures things out. It helps if the pilot turns the aircraft so the navigator can get a look around. On occasion, you can expect to discover that you're lost. It happens to nearly everybody once in a while because your view is so limited at these altitudes. Sometimes you can use the compass to orient yourself if there are enough identifiable terrain features to take bearings on. In hilly or rough terrain, you can sometimes get a fix by estimating the altitude of surrounding high points and relating them to altitudes shown on the map. As you become more experienced at the unique problems of N.O.E. navigation, you'll find that you can usually get yourself located again. If it turns out, however, that you can't get relocated, you should attempt to retrace your route to the last checkpoint and try again from there. On tactical flights, your mission will sometimes require you to make a pinnacle approach. In N.O.E. flight, the technique for a pinnacle approach is different from the way you would ordinarily do it, since the usual way would expose you to enemy fire. What you do is to remain N.O.E. and fly up the hill. However, wind is a crucial factor in this maneuver. You must take it into account. The preferred method is to fly up the leeward, or downwind side, using extra power as necessary to overcome the downdraft. Notice that when you reach the top, you'll be set up for a straight-ahead landing into the wind. It's possible to fly this from the windward side of the hill, but it's a good bit more tricky. As you reach the top, the wind tends to carry you up. That makes it more difficult to get set up in a good approach. And it also increases your exposure to enemy observation and fire. When the situation is going to require you to make a downwind approach, whether for a pinnacle landing or anywhere else, it's especially important that you be familiar with your aircraft limitations. The technique for a downwind approach goes like this. You first slow way down before reaching the point of intercepting the approach path. The slow speed is important because you can't see far enough ahead to anticipate well when you're so low to the ground. Be prepared to come on with power. Due to the tailwind, you will lose translational lift sooner, and you'll have forward speed over the ground after your airspeed comes to zero. Let's see that again. Downwind, you need to guard against tail boom yaw. That's always true in N.O.E. flight, especially in a tight place. Also, make sure you don't let the wind push your tail boom up. The nose-down attitude would increase your forward speed.
Now, let's talk about a couple of other N.O.E. procedures. Things that you will not practice during training, but that you will need to know about. Emergencies during N.O.E.
First, settling with power. It's much more apt to occur during N.O.E. because you so often hover out of ground effect. But the time may come when load and density altitude work against you. Immediately drop the nose to gain airspeed and reduce power. Do not increase collective. Recall that the problem is one of settling in your own rotor wash. Reducing power means less rotor wash and a quicker recovery. Again, the procedure is drop the nose reduce collective, maintain directional control. And now we come to the topic of emergency landing from N.O.E. It's not as bad as it sounds. Experience has proved that a pilot's instinctive reaction is often better than when he has too much time to think in an emergency. First, let's deal with the basic question of dissipating your speed. If you're lucky enough to be flying over a smooth, hard surface, you can concentrate on controlling sink rate and accept the sliding landing. However, the worse the terrain, rough, rocky, or soft, the more important it is to land with the minimum possible forward speed. If you have to land into trees, they will absorb your vertical speed. Dissipate as much of the ground speed as you can. If possible, maneuver to avoid contact with tree trunks while you're still flying.
The most important thing to remember is N.O.E. is not a speed contest. There are no prizes for getting there first. Don't ever forget the basic rule. The lower you go, the slower you go. Nap of the Earth is a rigorous and demanding kind of flying. You got to do it with the right equipment, the right training, and close command supervision. And then it may not be everybody's thing. But when you do it right, it is not a hazardous or high-risk business. It's a challenge. And like all other challenges in life, it brings its own rewards of satisfaction when you learn to do it well.
In Vietnam, pilots call it the Snake. Officially, it is the AH-1G. The Cobra entered combat in 1967, 16 months after contract go-ahead. Since that time, over 600 Cobras have been delivered. Most arrive in Vietnam aboard a Jeep carrier where they are unwrapped, unpacked, assembled, tested, and flown in a matter of hours. On this particular day, 26 Cobras were flown off, a new record. Once in country, the Cobra is soon performing missions. The Cobra's speed advantage enables it to dash ahead and soften up the landing zone before the troop-carrying helicopters arrive. Firing runs are made from several different directions and rake the area with rockets, miniguns, and grenades. Suppressive fire continues through the landing operation. Seconds before touchdown, Smokey lays a screen to cover the landing. Smoke provides the troop carriers with an extra margin of safety. Once the troops are on the ground, the Cobra's mission changes to direct fire support. Enemy positions are pinpointed by the ground commander, who is in direct radio communication with the Cobra fire team leader. The Cobra's accuracy permits the ground commander to safely direct fire to within meters of his own positions. Another important mission is aerial rocket artillery. With over a ton of ordnance aboard, the Cobra has the firepower of a 38-round howitzer barrage and the ability to deliver instant fire for effect. The Cobra is designed to live in the field. Rearming requires no special ground equipment. Its systems have been designed with simplicity in mind. Ground crews are easily cross-trained. Inspection and maintenance procedures are similar to those on the Huey. Simplicity is the key to its high operational readiness record. The slim silhouette and high-speed maneuverability of the Cobra give it a high degree of combat survivability. Simple electronic stability and control augmentation system improves maneuverability and assures accurate ordnance delivery. The Cobra also strikes at night. Regularly scheduled night missions are effectively disrupting enemy troop movements and resupply operations. This is the Cobra in Vietnam. In production are advanced armament systems which expand the Cobra's mission capability. The XM-35 20mm cannon kit carries 1,000 rounds of ammunition and fires at 750 shots per minute. The kit can be installed on all AH-1Gs. The 20mm turret provides increased standoff capability in a flex mode and fires at 750 shots per minute. In development is a 30mm cannon which can be installed in wing or turret systems. The proposed TOW missile system will provide a hard point target capability. Cobra, the newest of the battle-proven Hueys.